Hello everybody, Colesaurus Dickinsona here, and today we're back at the reptile rack, and right in between state mandated tests and final exams, I'm squeezing in a video because that's proper study habits. Highly recommend it. Just kidding, don't do this please. But today we have a pretty fun video because I was at my local, actually not local, it was a chain pet store. It was actually PetSmart. I can say that because I'm showing one of their things. And I was getting feeder insects, as one does when they have reptiles. And I came across this little paper, and it said, "Getting to know your eyelash crested gecko." And obviously that piqued my eye because I've kept a few cresties over the years, and I obviously plan on getting more into them. In fact, this is my one of my boys, Leonard. Leonard's an awesome cresty. Raptor is not very hand tame, so I wouldn't really get him out for a video unless I was like showing him very quickly. But he's gonna be out this whole time, hopefully, if he doesn't poop everywhere. I even have this little stick for him, so I'm just gonna plop him down here. He's very in shed right now, so his toe pads aren't working the best as I'd like them to. However, he's still quite beautiful, even though he's very, very gray and dull. So without further ado, I have barely looked at this, so let's get on reading. I'm very excited to see what PetSmart says for caring for your crested gecko. All right. Oh, awesome. The first thing I see is not necessarily that true. High climbing and low fuss, eyelash crested geckos. That first two words are actually wrong. High climbing. The thing is, crested geckos are actually native, they're native to New Caledonia. And within New Caledonia, they share their environment with tons of other geckos. In fact, every single lizard native to New Caledonia is either a lizard or a skink. Is either a gecko or a skink. And so crested geckos share their environment with dozens of other gecko species. And the way that they actually are able to live that way is through something called niche partitioning. And the main way is that each species will live at a different level in the trees, with obviously one of the geckos, Rhacodactylus leachianus, being the apex predator, and it eats all the other geckos. And then there's a skink that eats lychees called the terror skink, or Phoboscincus something. I don't remember the species name of that, but it's a monotypic genus.
Quick side note, the Phoboscincus genus is actually not monotypic, as I just said. There's actually one other species called Phoboscincus garneri, and although it is smaller, it's still in the genus, so I was wrong there. There's another species. All right, let's get back to the video.
So the thing is, crested geckos are actually at the very lowest level. They're at the understory, and in fact, they can be found sometimes roaming around the forest floor. In fact, one of mine burrows, so that goes to show. In fact, crested geckos are rarely ever seen above 12 feet in the trees. And if you find one at 12 feet, it's really high. Normally they stay around 6 feet, which is about eye level for me, or little above eye level for me, because I'm 5'8". But, so yeah, high climbing is not necessarily the best way to describe crested geckos. If you were talking about like leachianus geckos, they are certainly high climbing. Unfortunately, they're not very low fuss either. Crested geckos, on the other hand, are very low fuss. They're named for the distinct ridge above their eyes. That is true. Crested geckos are certainly named for the crests that run above their eyes, past to these little flappy portions. They're very soft, and then down their back to their tail. There's actually another species of gecko in the same genus, Coralophus, called Coralophus saracenorum, or Saracenorum's collared gecko, or I think it's called like the white collared gecko, or the slender prehensile-tailed gecko. I just call them Saracenorums. But they basically look almost exactly like a crested gecko, except they lack those crests. So there's a good way. So definitely their crest is a very distinguishable feature for them. Experience level, beginner. I don't really like going by experience levels, but if someone was just getting into reptiles and wanted a crested gecko, obviously I'd recommend them. Eyelash crested geckos can grow up to 10 inches, or 25 centimeters for those who use the imperial system. And yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I mean, with the tail, they certainly can. Leonard, my boy here, does not have a tail, but that would be a very big crested gecko to get up to 10 inches with it, even with the tail. So maybe about like 4 or 5 inches without the tail for an adult. And eyelash crested geckos love to climb. They do. That's their behavior. Okay, so the eyelash crested gecko terrarium, an eyelash gecko. It says A. It says A, but that is grammatically incorrect. All right, what do you need? You need a terrarium, a screen lid, a heat lamp, and daylight bulb. I mean, unless you have plants in the tank, you really don't need a light. I would certainly not recommend the use of a heat bulb, because a heat bulb is going to dry out the tank, and it's also going to heat the tank up, and these guys come from quite south below the equator. It stays around, you know, like the upper 70s, maybe low 80s, where they come from in the wild. Like 85 is really warm for New Caledonia. So definitely don't use a heat bulb. They're fine room temperature. Okay, so heat lamp, daylight bulb. And if you could do UVB with them. I've heard of some people doing UVB, but you've got to be a little bit careful because most crested gecko foods contain D3. And the use of UVB with D3 will lead to overdose. But in one of my crested gecko tanks, actually, I'll put an iCard up in the corner. I did a vivarium build with Calking Herper, my good friend. And we did a vivarium build for one of my crested geckos, Raptor. And we actually used a light for that, but that's only because I have live plants in there, and they obviously need light. It is good to give them a day and night cycle, but if you're keeping them in a room that's well lit during the day and gets dark at night, you don't need a light on the tank. All right, next thing you need, plants and decor. I obviously recommend the use of plants. Live plants are preferable, but you can use fake plants as well. They're a lot easier to keep alive, that's for sure. A thermometer. It actually has an analog thermometer, which I don't recommend. If you're going to use one, use a digital, or you can do what I do, which is I have a temp gun, and basically you shine it, a little red dot comes. Ooh, red dot, fun. And then you can point it at like the warm side, or like the warm side, the cool side, the humid side, or you can even like point it on a certain part of the animal. And look, he's 75 degrees, perfect. But yeah, and I use this for all my enclosures, and I do it about like once a day, or twice a day. I'll just go and I'll basically go shoot all the different portions of the tanks, like the warm side, the cool side, the humid side, and then sometimes I'll even, if the animal's out, I can just do a little bit of a read to them. And obviously don't like put it in their eyes or anything, but yeah, it'll show you a lot more precisely what the temperature is. So that's what I recommend using instead of like an analog thermometer for sure. Okay. And it just fell on the floor. How fun. A food dish. Yeah, food dish is definitely very useful for them because a lot of these, what they're mainly going to be eating is like a fruit mixture or like a powder that's mixed in water that's formulated to especially be for New Caledonian geckos. So yes, however, they do have it on the floor of the enclosure. It's not terrible. It's better if it's elevated because that'll like feeder insects and the cleanup crew can get into it if it's on the ground, if you're bioactive, or just they can poop in it, more likely if it's on the ground. Or they may not be able to find it, because that's happened to me, if it's on the ground of the enclosure. So I recommend having an elevated one. That black thing right there is my elevated food dish for Leonard. And yeah, so I recommend elevating it instead of having it on the floor. Coconut fiber, reptile bark, or moss bedding. Yeah, I would recommend all those for crested geckos, or you could do a bioactive mix, like I have my Biodude substrate. Leonard actually has this like carpet basically. So you can do a whole host of, it's not like a carpet, it's not like Repti carpet, it's more like AstroTurf, or like turf. I'm planning on putting him in a bioactive at some point though, so yeah. That's just what I got him with. He was a rehome. So yeah, totally recommend having like some sort of loose substrate that holds humidity with these guys. So yeah, I would totally recommend having what they said. A water dish. You don't necessarily need a water dish with these guys because you spray them really once a day if you're in a normal household, or if you're like a major breeder. I've heard of some people who just have a humidifier in their room and it keeps the humidity up, and then they give all their crested geckos water dishes. And contrary to popular belief, these guys will drink from standing water. But yeah, you could totally have a water dish. I just think it's a bit unnecessary if you're spraying them because they will just drink normally if you're doing that. A hygrometer and thermometer. They already said a thermometer, but you know what? Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, hygrometer, definitely useful. And like I think it's like the Exoterra Combometer has both, and it's digital, not analog, so it's easier to read, and it's outside of the tank, which is really nice. All right, basking site beneath basking heat lamp. That's not, I mean, you could, if you have a basking lamp, which I don't recommend. I mean, you could, but the thing is, your crested gecko is never going to use it because they don't bask. They're completely nocturnal. They come out in the middle of the night when it's already cooled down, if you're keeping them right. All right, daytime temperature. Cool side, 75 to 80 degrees. I mean, yeah, that's a little warm for a cool side. Warm side, what is that, 80 to 85 degrees. Okay, that's getting really hot for a crested gecko. I would not recommend keeping them that warm. Obviously, they're very hardy animals. They could probably survive it, but I mean, that's not how I keep mine. And obviously, everyone keeps theirs differently. Night temperature, 65 to 75 degrees. Yeah, I mean, that's perfectly fine for them. Oh, and in Celsius, the day temperature, the cool side would be 24 to 27, the warm side would be 27 to 30, and the nighttime would be 18 to 24. So these guys can get into pretty cold temperatures, and Leonard here is actually firing up. They can slightly change the color of their body. And the humidity, 50 to 80%. I would say more along the lines of 60 to 80%. 60 when it like dries out, and about 80 when you spray it, or that'll probably get it up to 100. How do I set up an eyelash gecko terrarium? I mean, I need to know that, obviously. I have no idea how to set up their terrariums at all. Eyelash crested geckos can live in groups, but do not house more than 2 males in a tank. One gecko needs a minimum of a 20-gallon high terrarium with a screened lid. Obviously, 2 males in a tank, not going to end well. They're going to fight. They're pretty territorial when it comes to that nature. And in the wild, some males will have scars on their head. It's not uncommon, actually. And, I mean, it's a very slippery slope when talking about can crested geckos live in groups, because some people say they can. Some people say that never to do it unless, like, you're breeding and only for certain times. I fall along the spectrum of I would house them in a colony if the tank is big enough. However, only 1 male, and if you see any signs of like the female becoming overbred, because like if she's getting stressed because the male won't stop pestering her, or if they fight because sometimes they just don't get along, not to the extent that Leachianus geckos do, but they can certainly not get along with one another, then definitely separate them, and always make sure to have a separate tank on hand in case you need to separate them. And if you're ever getting a new gecko, like if you have an old gecko, put them through a quarantine period, because you can spread diseases and parasites that way. All right, Line the habitat with reptile carpet or 2 to 3 inches of coconut fiber, moss, or bark bedding. Remove droppings and spot clean frequently. Change the bedding monthly. 2 to 3 inches of coconut fiber. Yeah, I mean that seems good. Like I've got the carpet in there. I've got the bioactive substrate in there. Spot clean, like remove the droppings or change the bedding if you don't have a bioactive. If you do have a bioactive, you may need to do a little bit of spot cleaning, but definitely you won't want to change the bedding because you're going to rip up the roots of the live plants, and that kind of defeats the purpose of having bioactive, which is where the cleanup crew eats and decomposes all the droppings and dead stuff. So you technically don't need to do that. Add rock or wood decor for hiding and live or artificial branches for climbing, and mist the habitat daily. Couldn't have said it better. I mean, yeah. That's what you do. You mist it daily. And yeah, so that's pretty much normal. Eyelash crested geckos require a temperature gradient, cool on the bottom and warm at the top. That's not necessarily that true. I mean, I don't keep mine. Actually, technically Raptor, his lights create like a tiny bit of heat, so he has like a 2-degree difference, but it doesn't seem to impact him that much. Like he just goes where he wants to go, basically. And Leonard does fine without one in general, so I don't necessarily think that they're that beneficial for crested geckos, but that's my personal experience. Again, someone else may say that they are 100% beneficial. I just haven't heard that very much. Alright, equip the habitat with 1 or 2 thermometers, one at the top and one at the bottom. Measure the temperature and a hygrometer to measure humidity. That was worded weirdly. Use the chart opposite to regulate temperature, which is the one I just read. Again, I've got my handy dandy. So, you know, I don't necessarily, that's how I measure my temperatures. I don't use like the little sticky ones anyways, so yeah. And I think that is a bit overkill, if I'm being completely honest. That may just be PetSmart trying to sell you more thermometers. But yeah. Use a low wattage heat bulb or ceramic heat emitter to provide warmth. Okay, I will go ahead and definitely say never use a ceramic heat emitter, because ceramic heat emitters will dry out your enclosure like crazy, and your crested gecko will get dehydrated. So, whereas a heat bulb may work for a crested gecko, do not use a ceramic heat emitter. So yeah, to provide warmth, turn off the heat element for 12 hours at night, so as long as the ambient room does not drop below 65 degrees. Don't keep a light on if even, like, get something that doesn't produce light, like a heat mat, basically. Use a heat mat if your house gets below 65 degrees at night, which just sounds unbearable to begin with, so I don't know why it would. But if it does get 65 degrees or 18 degrees Celsius, I think you've got bigger problems. So I don't think you'll have to worry about that. But yeah, don't leave a light on, because they're nocturnal, and if they see a light on, they will think it's daytime, and they won't come out to eat. They'll just stay hidden. Alright. For more information, consult no free promos, PetSmart. God. If you have more questions, leave a comment and I'll answer. Okay, what should I feed my crested gecko? This is always fun. Crested geckos are omnivores. Their diet consists of insects and fruit. I'm glad that they said insects, because a lot of people label crested geckos as like insect-free reptiles to get more people to buy them. They're not. They are not insect-free. In fact, 90% of their wild diet in the wild, good use of words, Cole, is insects. They eat a lot of insects. They'll eat small vertebrates as well. I haven't heard, it's not uncommon for them to eat other lizards. So yeah, they're 100% omnivores. They're not herbivores like a lot of people will say, and that's how I first found out that's what I learned when I was first getting into them. is that they were herbivores, and they're not. They're omnivores. They eat a lot of both. However, occasionally, like if you don't feed your baby when you're growing it up enough insects, they won't know to eat insects. So that's unfortunately something that happens fairly often. However, a lot of like the crested gecko food on the market, like the Pangea and Rapashi and stuff, actually has like they have protein, and some of them have ground up insects in them. So I would always recommend the ones that use the base of egg rather than like I forget the other one. I think it's like banana, like dried banana or dried egg, and I totally recommend dried egg over because it has more protein, and these guys need protein. All right, young crested geckos. 1 times daily or every other day, gut-loaded crickets or dubia roaches. Can't get dubia roaches in Florida; they're illegal, but crickets totally. Every day for like a hatchling cresty, but once they get over like 6 months, I wouldn't recommend doing every day. I would recommend doing every other day. Dust with calcium powder 2 to 3 times a week. Repti multivitamin once a week, or used by directed as your veterinarian. Yeah, I mean, that may be a little too much. You may get actually, yeah, no, that seems good because calcium's not really gonna make it have an overdose, but yeah. Always offer a nutritionally balanced powdered diet. Yeah. I've got both mine on that. That's what they eat for the most part. I mean, I don't feed them crickets every other day or 3 times a week or wherever it says for adults. I just, I'll feed them like once a month. I'll give them some live insects. Adult crested geckos, insects, 1 time weekly. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you're doing the powdered diet mixed with water, you don't really need crickets even every week. I feed them like a bunch every month, like 6 every month basically, or every couple of weeks, just depending on how I feel or how they look. And sometimes they just don't want insects, so yeah, you gotta be careful. Yeah, so yeah, and then clean daily, or water needs to be clean daily and provided at all times. They will drink when you spray them. You don't need to worry about a water bowl unless you're doing the option where you want to keep your room a certain humidity and provide water bowls for them to drink out of, which I think it also works. I know a lot of crested gecko breeders will do that. When should I contact my veterinarian? So reptiles certainly don't need it as much as like mammals do or birds, but it's good to definitely get them checked out by a vet every so often. The hard part is finding a vet that will see reptiles, because a lot of vets will only specialize in like dogs or cats or some of the more common exotics like the rodents, which rodents or birds or stuff like that, like the cute little fuzzy or furry or feathery guys, but not a whole lot want to see the creepy and crawly guys, which I think these guys are very cute, by the way. I don't know why a lot of people don't. But yeah, so do vet appointments every so often. Don't do them too often. In addition to regularly scheduled appointments, contact your reptile veterinarian if you notice the signs. Hiding more than usual. Crested geckos hide all day. That's what you're getting into when you get a crested gecko. I mean, you're getting a nocturnal animal. Yeah, you won't see them very often. I will go like sometimes days without seeing raptor. It's nothing out of the ordinary if your crested gecko is hiding. In fact, if your crested gecko is out in the open, that's more of a red flag. Eating or drinking less, weight loss, totally. That could indicate cryptosporidium, which is an awful pathogen. It's a protozoa, or any other type of bacterial or viral infection. Swollen joints or reluctance to move. Yeah, that could be gout. Reptiles can get gout, so you got to be careful about that. If they have swollen joints, and if they're reluctant to move, they may like have some sort of illness or injury. Discharge from the eyes, nose, or mouth. Yeah, that could certainly mean that they have like a respiratory infection. If it's not humid enough, or it gets too cold or too warm, they could definitely get those respiratory infections. Or if they catch, my Leonard here is going off camera, or if they catch something called serpentivirus, which, despite their name, there are strains that infect reptiles. So yeah, you got to be careful about that. I don't know if crested geckos have a certain strain that affects them. But yeah, serpentivirus, I'll put it right like here, I think, if they can catch it. Okay, shedding problems, discolored skin. Again, crested geckos can fire up and down patches of their skin depending on the humidity, their mood, the temperature, lighting, everything. So yeah, you gotta be careful about that. It's not just like if they have like a gray patch and the rest of them is fired up, that could simply mean that all but one patch was undercover and they fired up, and that one patch was in light, so it didn't fire up. So if you see like a gray patch, yeah, that's not necessarily a red flag. But shedding problems, you don't necessarily need to contact a vet. That just simply may mean that you need to add more humidity, or you need to give your crested gecko a soak. But usually they'll get that figured out themselves. All right, runny droppings for more than 2 days. Crested geckos don't necessarily poop every day, so if they have feces that's like runny for like a couple weeks, then yes, totally. But if it's like 2 days, then I would not say. Decreased frequency in droppings. It's kind of hard to monitor how often they're pooping, especially if you have a bioactive tank in which your isopods will like start eating the poop and it'll be gone like in 2 days. It's hard to notice, but yeah, if you do notice that it hasn't pooped in like a month, then yes, something's wrong. Especially if like you see them getting kind of swollen, because that could mean that there's an intestinal blockage. And the last one is increased basking time. If you see your crested gecko basking at all, you're gonna have a problem. And yeah, that's it. That is PetSmart's getting to know your eyelash crested gecko. Would I recommend 100% of the stuff they say? No. That's my personal way of doing things. But again, there are some things that would be kind of harmful for crested geckos in general if you do keep them that way. So I wouldn't really recommend doing your care advice based on that. Obviously, you should look at more than one source if you're thinking about getting an animal. In fact, you may not even, I don't even recommend, like, if you're living up in Minnesota or Australia, actually, never mind, if you're in Australia, you can't keep crested geckos, or like Japan or anywhere else. This goes for like North Florida, basically, my care. So it really depends on your climate and how you keep your house. So not all of one thing will work for everyone. So I totally recommend doing your research and doing research of their native habitats and wild crested geckos to see how you can actually incorporate that into captive life. So yeah, it's more than just reading a pamphlet, but or watching a YouTube video. Like, I would recommend, if you're thinking about getting a crested gecko, to do more research than just watching this video. Watch dozens of videos, read hundreds of articles, do all the research. It's way better to be over-prepared than it is to be under-prepared. But yeah, if you have any questions about crested geckos or their care or them in the wild or anything else, leave a comment. Leave a comment about what you think about the PetSmart Care Guide. Leave a like on the video if you haven't, and if you haven't subscribed, then go ahead and subscribe and hit that bell notification so you're always notified every time I upload a video just like this one. And without further ado, Colesaurus Dickinsoni and Leonard the Crested Gecko signing out.
What the dog doing?
Alright. Add rocks or branches and Leonard pooped. Let's go! Ice was smelling it, and oh wow, he is really going. I will be right back. That smells awful.